Bilt, not bored. Wow, I'm going to miss that. It's going away like in another week, but for now we still got it. So how are you guys doing this morning? Good? Excellent. I want you to look around really quick. Just spot the crowd around you. You'll notice that things are getting a little full, and that's a good thing. And so I just want to remind you that come the first of the year, we are going to be going to 2 services as a church. And I know for some of you, you're like, oh man, but I love seeing everybody in one place, and I might not see some of my friends, and there's all those kinds of things. But we go back to what the motivation behind that is, and it is an opportunity to serve, right? We get to serve one another. We get to serve our community. We get to serve the opportunity for those who may be trying to understand what Christianity is about, who Christ is, what the Bible says. And so all of that is an opportunity for us to say, you know what, I'm going to put others before myself, and I'm going to do something a little different, a little uncomfortable, but it's for a greater good. So it's an opportunity for us as a church to be able to serve one another and serve our community. So again, we just want you to start getting ready for the fact that, you know what, it's coming sooner than later. Second Sunday of January, we're going to be doing that. And so we're getting those pieces in place to make that happen. But again, it's going to be a great opportunity. I'm looking forward to seeing how God stretches all of us and how he uses that, and how from that redemption still has the opportunity to continue to grow and to be everything that Jesus has saved it to be. And so this morning, as we're going to be talking about this very idea of serving, I want us to pray, get ready as we continue our FIT series, what it means to be a follower in training. So if you would join me right now in prayer, I would so love that. Let's go ahead and pray together. Jesus, I thank you for the fact that you've called us to live beyond ourselves, and that's how you shape us, and that's how you stretch us. It seems that growth never comes in the easy things, but in the challenging things where we lay ourselves out a little bit, where we go beyond our comfort level, and maybe even we have to tap into places where we feel a little insecure or uncertain or even ill-equipped. And it's there where you show up. I think about Paul when he talks about it's really when he's weak that's when you're strong. And it's where grace is really made complete in our lives. It's where we're pressed beyond the boundaries of what is familiar. And then you then fill in those gaps and you show up. And so I pray that we will receive what this is in our lives, that we won't look and say, man, I don't want to be stretched because, again, that's uncomfortable. But rather we'd say, oh, it's only when we're stretched and made uncomfortable that we are then given the opportunity to really grow and rely on you. So, I pray that you will, again, just do really great work in our hearts and inspire us to action, and may we see the fruit of what it is you seek to accomplish. And so, again, we are committed to you. We want to follow after you faithfully and follow after you hard and follow after you because we know you fill us up in that process. So teach us and train us today in those things. We ask these in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, so I've got a pop quiz for you this morning. This is a pop quiz where you don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to be verbal in any way. You just have to think to yourself, which is really easy. All right, so here's the pop quiz. It's only 2 initial questions. First question is this: why do you, as an individual, thinking to yourself, why do you come to church? Just register your answer. Why do you decide to get up early on a day off, where you could sleep in, you could stay home, you could eat crepes, whatever else, but you decide to get up early and come on a Sunday morning to church? Why do you do that? That's the first question. Second question I want to ask you is, why do you opt to learn the Bible? Whether you be reading it or going to a Bible study or a regroup or whatever, why do you want to learn the Bible? Those are your 2 questions. Why do you go to church? Why do you want to learn the Bible? All right, so hopefully you got some answers locked in. Now, the second batch of questions is, why do you think Jesus has you go to church? And why do you think Jesus wants you to learn the Bible? So the first was you, and the second is Jesus, right? And here's my assessment and maybe assumption, but as I asked that of my own life, I realized that the answers that I gave from myself were a little bit different than perhaps the answers that Jesus would give to me. So for me, I go, well, I go to church and I read the Bible because I want to be equipped, I want to grow, I want to learn, it's familiar, I take comfort in it, I think it's healthy, I'm curious, I like friendship and community, and I have all those reasons for why I do it. When I think about Jesus' answer, it's a little bit different. Perhaps it's a little bit more invested. I think that answer is seen in the letter that Paul wrote to a group of new Christians in a city called Ephesus. He writes this little letter helping them in their faith as they're growing. And he tells them, in essence, really why we want to learn God's truth and why we're a part of the church. He says this in chapter 4, and so I start there. It says, He, that is God and Jesus working in concert, He gave to all of us apostles and prophets and evangelists and shepherds and teachers. Why? It says to equip the saints for the work of ministry. So, why do we want to learn? Why do we want to know the Bible? Why did He give us people with abilities to teach us the Bible? Well, He did that to equip. And that's just equip us so we go, man, I've learned this great Bible study thing and I can go home and I can research it and take some notes and it was a really great thing. No, it says to equip the saints for what? For the work of ministry, doing things, right? He goes on to say, for the building up of the body of Christ until we all attain to the unity of the faith of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. So in other words, when we say, Jesus, why do you want us to go to church and why do you want us to read the Bible? He says, I do that because I want to equip you so that you invest. That each of you invests into one another to establish fidelity and unity and a sense of mutual purpose, right? And so there's this thing in which we learn and we come, so we knit and we connect and we shape each other so as to grow, which means growth is never a solo endeavor. Growth is always because we're pouring out into others and others are pouring into us. And that's what it means to be a part of the church, right? And so church in the Bible is less about education. And it's more about establishing us for opportunities to serve. And so as we continue through this whole series of Bilt, Not Born, what it means to be a follower in training, following after Jesus, today is our 9th kind of component of the different tools that we lean into to be a faithful follower in training. And so, again, if you are taking notes today we are looking at how fit people serve one another willingly. Now, believe it or not, we have an app, and that app has notes that you can follow along, which are updated this week. I would have to say the last few weeks of my life, days have gone by in seconds, and weeks have gone by in minutes, and so it was like, I'm sitting there going, man, now point number 1 last week, and everybody's like, oh, I got nothing. Well, you got notes this week, all right? So they're there, they're up, and you can use those as a tool to move along. Now, last week, and again, if you haven't downloaded our app, you can do that. We have a texting thing that you can get, or you can go to iTunes, any number of places to get that out, but it's a great tool, by the way, just to know what's going on in redemption and listen and watch different videos and podcasts and that kind of thing. So lots of stuff there. Now, with that said, though, last week, we were talking about how we invest our treasure, right? It was all about how we as followers in training want to have a spirit of generosity with our treasure. So today, though, is about generosity with our time and our talents. So time, talent, and treasure are all things that Jesus calls us to invest, calls us to be willing to share and make investment into the lives of others. That's the whole spirit of the last 2 weeks. And then when I think about this as a church, I want you to kind of maybe for a second be able to see how the sausage is made, kind of getting behind the scenes with some of our priorities. From the day that we started Redemption Church, we knew that we wanted it to be a place where people served. So much so that everything that we sought to put together and engineer was built around the idea of saying, we want to create spaces and pockets so that people might have a place to invest. Because when people invest, there's ownership. If it's just a spectator sport, I come, I sit, I listen, I leave, there's not investment in that. It's not the same thing. So we said we want to create as many spaces as possible for people to invest. And I remember we had somebody a couple of years ago said, you're saying it takes this many people to run Redemption on a weekly basis. And we're like, yeah. And they're like, that's way too inefficient. You could do it with half the people. And we're like, you're missing the point. The point is to create space. The point is not to say how efficient can we run Redemption Church. The point is to say how much can we wire Redemption Church to be we the people as opposed to we the staff, right? Because that's not the heart. And so to give a sense of perspective, every week it takes 75 non-paid lay people to make Redemption Church happen. 75 people every week is needed to make this place happen, whether it be setup or tear down crews, whether it be regroup leaders, whether it be Sunday school teachers, whether it be youth workers, whether it be coffee and welcome and all these different things. And all of those are intentional. We want people to have investment. And so it takes 75 people. And when we go to 2 services, guess what? It takes more than 75, right? It's going to take a few more. Right? And so, in other words, we go, and creating 2 services, it's not simply, because we're praying that there's growth and that growth continues to happen, but we're also saying, how do we create more space for people to have investment, to be partners, not just, kind of like, viewers, but partners in what we do. Because our heart is to see everybody in some capacity serve. And serve is the operative word. In fact, as I get into this morning, I want to highlight a couple of things about serving or service, and I want to start with what service is not, right? So I always want to, let's start with the negative, get it out of the way, then we can move to the positive, right? So what service is not. The first thing I want you to know is that service is not volunteerism. Service is not volunteerism. Now, I say that because oftentimes, and it's hard even in the church context, right? Because we'll say, we need more volunteers. And then every time we say that, I wince. No, we don't need volunteers. We need servants. See, because a volunteer is a little different. A volunteer sometimes has the tendency in life to look and say, well, I'm giving you my time. I'm volunteering myself to your cause. And sometimes, whether we mean to or not, the spirit of a volunteer is I'm doing you a favor by volunteering my time. And even maybe a little bit more deeply in the spirit of a volunteer is saying if I'm treated without appreciation, if I'm not recognized in some way because I'm giving my time to you, I might be a little bit bothered by that because, again, I'm volunteering. Right? That can be the challenge. But see, Christian, biblical, Jesus-centered service isn't volunteerism, right? It's actually something altogether different, as we're going to see this morning. The second thing that service is not is that service is not the same as sacrifice, all right? Service isn't the same as sacrifice because what I find in sacrifice is that oftentimes sacrifice is occasional. It's not continual. Sacrifice is often big. And sacrifice, when somebody does it, is rewarded. Because it's recognized as, wow, man, you leaned over the plate, you took one for the team, that was a hard thing, that was a huge opportunity, and you put yourself out there, that's sacrificial. And I go, man, sacrifice is awesome, but service isn't necessarily sacrifice. For service is more regular, maybe weekly. So it's not occasional, it's not on occasion, but it's often. And it's not always big, it's usually very small, it's not always celebrated. In fact, oftentimes service is mundane, service is unseen. Service is that thing that you do that maybe nobody else slaps you on the back for and says, that is awesome, fantastic, way to go. Not that they shouldn't, they should, but oftentimes people serve and they're just doing it week in, week out faithfully, and maybe not everybody realizes that. They're rolling in here at 6 a.m. to set up the sound system, and everybody else is still asleep, right? And these are lay people that are serving, even though it's their day off too, to come in and do that. And nobody maybe knows who those people are, but they just do it. Or they're Sunday school teachers. Week in and week out, they're doing that. And that's that service, but it's not necessarily always sacrifice. And I guess what that means is that service isn't in fact really service, right? What service is servanthood, right? Service is really at the core. When we think about it in the Bible, it's about servanthood. In other words, what we as followers in training need to realize is that it's not that we're helping, right? That's the way we tend to see it. I'm helping out. We need to see ourselves more like the help, right? It's not that we're helping as though it's the task, but there's a spirit where we say, wait, I'm the help. Right? I'm the true slave in the equation. I am the true servant in the equation. It's not just that I'm willing to serve, but here's a crazy one. I'm so willing to serve that I continue to serve, ready? Even if I'm treated like a servant. I'm willing to serve with a good heart, good spirit, good attitude, keep pressing into it, even if at times I'm treated like a servant. And here's the key. We're willing to do that because it's really not about the people that I serve or the ministries or the tasks that I perform in serving. More deeply, it's about the God that I serve in the process of it all. So I go, I'm okay being in this role because I know Jesus sees. I'm okay being in this role and sometimes people overlooking me because I know Jesus doesn't overlook me. I'm okay being in this space and doing it week in, week out, and maybe nobody gives me the pat on the back, but I know Jesus looks and he rejoices and there's great joy and he rewards and he's pleased, and that's enough for me because I know I have an audience of one that pays attention and he's the only one that really matters. And so this is why we want to embrace this whole idea of servanthood. In fact, in the New Testament, it's interesting, there's a lot of descriptors for Christians, right? So we're called soldiers and we're called athletes and we're called ambassadors, but the dominant concept is this word doulos in Greek. Doulos, which is slave, right? Or bondservant or servant. It depends on what version you have to translate that. But it's a terrible marketing strategy. Awful. Right? Especially first century Roman Empire. Nobody says, when I grow up, I want to be a slave. Nobody. And if you're trying to start a movement, right, like this really crazy off the chain, everybody wants to join a movement, you don't say, hey, come and join the slave club. Nobody's going to go, hey, that's brilliant. Make that an infomercial. That'll beat out ShamWow any day, right? No, but nobody wants to be a slave. Nobody. But in Christianity, there is this idea that says, no, this is redemptive. This goes against a grain that nobody else wants to be, but when you do it, you will be more full than you dreamed possible. Now, I think the fair question is, if being a slave was so unsavory in that culture, then why would Jesus emphasized it as the primary descriptor of a follower in training? Why would he do that? Well, we see a hint of this in Matthew chapter 10. And it all hinges on being like the one that we ultimately follow. Because for the Christian, imitation is worship. Imitation is worship. So if we're trying to imitate Christ, the more we imitate Christ, the more that is a form of our worship, right? And so here's what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 10. He says, starting in verse 24, a disciple, a follower in training, is not above his teacher. And a servant, well, that servant is not going to be above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher and the servant like his master. Now, when he says this, it's clear for us to understand that we are in the role of the servant here. We're in the role of the disciple. Jesus is in the role of the master and the teacher, right? So, okay, We follow his lead. What we know, though, about Jesus in his lead is that how did he lead? As a servant. As a servant. So he's like, hey, if I chose to go servant mode and you're not above me, guess what? You get to be even more of a servant. If I'm the teacher and I'm teaching servanthood, then you have the awesome opportunity to learn how to be a servant. And so if you're following along on our notes, the very first thing that we need to embrace as we're looking at servanthood is that Jesus, number one, he modeled servanthood to his followers. He modeled it. In fact, if his kingdom was a corporation and he decided to create letterhead, there would be a motto on the very top of the letterhead, kind of encapsulating, this is what my kingdom's about. This is how this thing rolls. This is what I expect of everybody in my kingdom company. This is how we do it, right? It would be right at the top of his letterhead. And we see that actually in the shortest of the 4 historical documents about the life of Jesus. Those 4 historical documents are called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark is the shortest, written by a second-generation follower in training, learning from Peter, a first-generation follower. And Mark is writing this historical account like an embedded journalist out in a war zone. It's very quick and pithy and kind of just everything moves really, really rapid. And so he's trying to highlight the primary themes that are critical to what Jesus was doing, how he rolled into the world, began the kingdom, everything kind of marches on from that. And in Mark chapter 10, we see eventually where there is this verse that I think is the motto at the top of the letterhead of Jesus' kingdom documentation. Now, it doesn't start there. It doesn't start with the motto. It starts with a problem. And the problem that it starts with is that some of his followers in training started looking at what Jesus is up to, and they started thinking in terms of climbing the kingdom ladder. Right? So they're thinking like, hey man, this is ground level. This is like the start of, like a high venture company and high risk maybe, but boy, it's going to pay off. And if we get down on the ground level, we're going to have some awesome stuff. And so 2 of the guys come to Jesus, James and John. They're brothers. They're called the sons of thunder because they're idiots. And they're always barking ideas and they're not thinking them through. And they bark an idea to Jesus that says, hey dude, can we be on your right and your left? Can we kind of be like the primary dudes with your kingdom? And all the other followers in training hear this and they are angry. They're angry that James and John have dared to actually ask first. In other words, all these other guys are like, I should have done it yesterday. That's their spirit, I think. They beat me to the punch, and so everybody's angry. And then Jesus says this, starting in verse 42, right? He just jacks up their priority system really quick. It says, Jesus called them to him, and he said to them, you've experienced that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles, they lord it over them. They say, I have authority, I have power, I have say-so, I should be recognized, I should be accommodated, I should be respected, I have rights and privileges, and you need to acknowledge them. He says, you know that that's what they're like. They lord it over people, and they're great ones. They exercise authority over them. You get it. It's how the world works. He says in verse 43, but it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must. You got a Bible, circle, underline, highlight, must. It's not a suggestion. It's not an option. It's not just like, hey, you might consider this, right? He says, if you want to do this different, whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. Right? So he gives the kingdom equation. And he says, you want to really increase in the kingdom structure? You go down. Up is down. Now in the world, down is down, up is up. Right? You climb the corporate ladder to get more authority, control, wealth, and power. But in the kingdom, no, you stoop. It's totally backwards, right? So, down is up. Because here's the thing about Jesus' kingdom. And if you're taking notes, you should write this down. Greatness. True greatness, which, by the way, will extend to every corner of your life. True greatness is always care-filled, not successful. True greatness is always care-filled. It's not successful. Now, our world is completely captivated by being successful. Right? We want to make sure the economy is successful, the corporations are successful, the people are successful in their jobs. And I'm not trying to say successful is bad, but if your drive is to just simply be successful and you miss being care-filled, you're missing the essence of true greatness when it comes to what the kingdom is, because the kingdom is not about lording over, being in power, having control, being lofty. It's about being the slave of all. And he says you must be the slave of all if you want to be first. That's where you have to go. And then he sticks the landing. And this is the motto at the top of the letterhead. He says in verse 45, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. So what's Jesus' mission statement in life? Well, the God of the universe that created this entire cosmic extravaganza that we take, these grand telescopes and stare out into the universe to see, where we take Hubble and take this little snapshot and we see galaxy upon galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars per galaxy and all the created things we can imagine, the human body and all the complexity and all the intricacy and everything we understand. And we go, that God decided to come into the world and become the ultimate slave of all. He says, this is what my mission is, to serve, not to be served. And so, if he is the master, and we're the student, we're the slave, and he's the teacher, right? And he says, okay, I'm teaching you something. I'm teaching you how to be a servant as I serve. That gets our attention. And we think about how Jesus served. He did not, when he says this, he didn't roll in like it was some kind of photo op, right? Like, okay, I got my publicist here. I'm going to spend 15 minutes passing out soup, getting pictures as I'm passing out the soup. And then I'm going to go back to my green room and eat my just green M&Ms and chill and put it on Instagram, hashtag blessed to serve, that's not what he did, right? Like, whew, all right, got my photo up, I'm done, feel filled up. No, he stretched out far to serve. In fact, it says, Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So throughout his life, he serves people. Some people he serves, and you know what? They don't come back and say thank you, right? There's like 10 dudes that he heals. One comes back, says thank you. 9 blew them off. They just did their thing, man. There's plenty of people that use Jesus. Feeds 5,000. You know what they did? We want more. Treated him like a servant. Treated him like some kind of weird vending machine from heaven. Put it in another quarter. Give us some food. Like maker boy. And yet he kept serving. Right? And then you get to where he gives his life as a ransom for many. He served us by taking our baggage. Right? So every attitude of sin I've ever had, action of sin I've ever had, affection of sin I've ever had, Jesus says, I'm going to serve you, Matt, by taking all of your baggage. And also I'm going to serve you by taking all of the shame associated with your baggage. And then, of course, because all of your baggage is sin against a holy God, I'm also going to take all of the penalty and punishment and wrath that all of your offense has earned you over the course of your life, and I'm going to take that for you as well. I'm going to suffer your hell, and I'm going to give you my standing, my righteousness. This is all the ways that I'm going to serve you in this. I look at that and I go, that is some crazy service. But then he does it with the Spirit. of true servanthood. So he's not just like doing all of that and being like, I'm so sick and tired of Matt. Can't stand serving him, but I promised my father I would do it, so I'm going to put up with that punk jerk pastor guy. And he never says thank you like he should. He's never quite as thankful as I'd like him to be. That's not the way he does it. I treat Jesus terrible sometimes and he serves. I look at what he wants in my life and I go the other direction in my own selfishness and he continues to serve. Right? So this is huge and there's a reason for it. We see it in Philippians chapter 2. We see where not only he modeled servanthood, he was willing to be treated like one because he had a greater goal. And it's from this that Paul says, all right, this is how you need to think. In Philippians chapter 2, it starts in verse 5. It says, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. So have this mindset. Think this way. Right? He's giving us a model to imitate. It says, have this mind among yourselves, which is also yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, though he was totally equal to God, all power, all authority, all glory, all goodness, all everything, even though he was that, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. Right? So his point is, Jesus could have said, listen, I'm God, I sit on a throne, I'm a king, you all down there are idiots, and so I'm just going to make demands. Stop being stupid. Like he could have done that. Sat on the throne, I'm king, you're not, you serve me, I don't serve you, stop being fools, stop sinning, get your lives together, you're reminding me of like a bunch of dorks that cannot figure out life, pull it together. He could have done that. But he doesn't do that. He took all of his privilege and said, you know what, I'm not going to say I'm too entitled to stoop. I'm too important to serve. He doesn't do that. He says, no, even though I'm God, I'm going to set all of that privilege aside, and I'm going to choose to be a servant. I'm going to choose to be a servant, and I'm going to be born in the likeness of man. And being in human form, he says, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. See, this shows how far down Jesus was willing to go for us. Like he doesn't take into the equation, wait, I'm God, I can demand things. He doesn't do any of that. Rather, what he does instead is he says, I am going to be the lowest of the low, and I'm going to go down low to serve. That's my mission. And see, this is the attitude that each of us is to have as we are followers in training, right? This is what we're supposed to do. And not simply because it's nice and it's kind and it's good and it's responsible to do these things, but rather we do this because at the core of what it means is that we enflesh Jesus in the serving. Right? So this is our opportunity to be increasingly like him in this way. Because here's the thing that we have to understand. Jesus, he did not simply serve us to rescue us so we could just comfortably go to heaven. No, what we see is that Jesus served us to rescue us, to then deploy us to serve others and himself through our lives, right? That's the essence of this whole thing. And so, again, what we need to start embracing is just as he is a servant, so we are too servants in his likeness. Which then means, in our next point in our notes, Jesus saved us to servanthood as his followers. Jesus saved us to servanthood as his followers. See, here's what we want to know. Or at least we have to focus on. Jesus did not save us so we could sit around. And Jesus didn't save us so we could soak. And Jesus certainly didn't save us so we could stand around and judge, right? The day we were saved, he didn't say like, here's a pillow, here's a bubble bath, here's a gavel, go judge people. He didn't do any of that. When we were saved, he says, here's a shovel, go and work. Go and do what I've called you to do in my likeness. Do what I have done in your life. That's what he does. In fact, we see this profoundly in 1 Peter. Short little letter that one of the earliest followers in training writes. And this is the encouragement he gives. He says, as each has received a gift, let us serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Now, I love this for a couple of reasons. First of all, I love this because it's not simply about task, but about the intention behind the task. Now, we see the task when it says, use your gifts, or use your talents, or use your abilities. Whether they're Holy Spirit-given gifts, or whether there are abilities, all of these are given by God, right? They're given for a purpose. But in this, as we display these things in our lives toward one another, what we see is that grace is also displayed in the act of serving. Now, I guess the question is, well, how is grace displayed, right? Like, how do we see grace in action? Well, I want to take us back to Philippians 2, just before Paul talks about the mindset of people having the mindset of Jesus, right? Because this is what our goal is, to think like Jesus thinks, to see the world as Jesus saw the world, as a servant. And what we see here is that he's linking, at least in my opinion, service and grace. And so this is what he says starting in verse 3 of chapter 2 of Philippians. He says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. Now, I think that's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, he's just saying, here's qualities that nobody likes. I mean, nobody likes these qualities. Even selfish and ambitious people that are negatively ambitious don't like these qualities. Nobody likes these qualities. And so what he's really getting at the core is, don't be a jerk when you serve. It's not about you, right? But then he goes a step deeper, and I think this really shows how what we're called to in serving is to basically break ourselves open and then allow grace to pour out and spill all over the people in our lives. He says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. See, first of all, in humility means to go low, right? To get low to the ground. And that is the essence of serving other people. It's saying, I'm going to put you above, and I'm going to go under, and I'm going to go as far down as I need to really lift you up. So that's humility. But then he says, in humility, count others as more significant than yourselves. That is a tough four-letter word. More. Right? I mean, that's a hard thing to see accomplished. Because what it means is it's looking at giving to others in grace, whether you're close to them, you're not close to them, they're a little odd, they're strange, you don't always connect, maybe they've even caused you pain, and you still look and you say, this is what I'm going to do in your life. I'm going to come under, and I'm going to consider you more significant than myself. It means giving to others when sometimes they don't appreciate what you give. It means serving in the lives of others who may not be all that thankful that you serve. But that's why we do this. See, ultimately it means giving to them because you want more for them than maybe even they realize they need. And we do all of this not because, again, everybody's so worthy around us. We do this because this is exactly what Jesus did in our lives. It's the same story. This is what he did for us. He stooped to care, to love, to serve, right? And so we follow his lead. This is why Paul continues in verse 4. And he says, let each of you look out not only for your own interests, which is very easy to do, but also to the interests of others. See, I dig this because this is both a test and a dare, right? It's a test because, again, it's never going to be easy to serve. Anybody that says, service is easy, then maybe needs to dig a little deeper on serving. So it's never going to be easy, but it dares us to press in more, to make a real attempt at investing regardless of the nature of maybe the relationship we have with that person. It tests us and dares us to invest into people and seeing Jesus beyond the people. right? I mean, this is what Jesus even says, right? When you've done it to the least of these, you've done it unto me, right? And so this is a part of what the essence of this whole thing is too. We're just saying, you know what, as I'm serving in kids, or I'm serving in a regroup, or I'm serving in the community, or I'm serving in set up and tear down, or whatever avenue you're serving in, it's not so much saying, and I'm serving people, but more importantly, I'm serving Jesus behind the people, because again, that's exactly what Jesus expects us to do. So it dares us. And it tests us. I'd say even beyond this, it's because it tests us and dares us in the way that it's hard, it's inconvenient. It might even stir insecurity in us. But that's why Jesus stormed into my life, to stretch me more. And this is the context in which he chooses to do that. Now, again, like I keep saying, there's nothing about this that is going to be like low-hanging fruit. There's nothing about it that's going to be fundamentally easy at all. But again, it's a little bit like even working out, right? If you want to build muscle mass, you actually have to put yourself under load. Nobody's going to build muscle if they don't ever pick up a weight, if they don't ever actually try to bring a little bit of tearing that brings a little bit of healing, that brings a little bit of bulk, right? So we have to be under load to experience strength and growth. And so Jesus, again, uses service to put us in the context where we then develop, right? So in a weird sort of way, it does take from us, but it takes ultimately to give. In fact, this leads us to the third point in your notes, which is Jesus rewards servanthood among his followers. Jesus rewards servanthood among his followers. In Matthew chapter 20, all right, another one of the earliest followers in training, writing down the history of Jesus and his life, records that Jesus said this. He says, whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Right? So he kind of sets this up saying, this is the way that the whole realm of my kingdom works. So he says this because earlier in chapter 19, he says, many who are first will be last, and the last, well, they're going to be first. See, here's the thing. Throughout this series, I keep saying Jesus isn't asking something from you, but he wants something for you. Here, I'm going to flip it, right? Here, he is asking for something from you, but he's doing that because he wants something even more for you, something bigger and more robust for life, right? That's why he's doing this. In other words, what he's saying is, I'm telling you, if you make yourself the lowest, the least, and last, I'm going to take you and I'm going to move you to the greatest and the first, right? Like, I'm going to do that in your life, and you're going to experience something much richer, not just in the life to come, which is easy to think about maybe because you go, well, that's far off. But he says, in this life, I will actually reward you as well. And I was thinking about this, like how that happens. And I was thinking about in my own world, I was thinking about who are the happiest people that I know, the most contented or peaceful people. And I've realized it's the people I know who are those who give. The givers are the happiest. It's really, oddly enough, the takers who are the most critical. Right? And so even in this world, the happy people are the givers, the critical people are the takers. And so they're never quite contented in the things of life. And I think this is true, and we've probably all experienced people like that. The people that are the most driven to be recognized or accommodated, they seem to be the ones that are never quite full. Whereas the people that are driven to, pour out, put others first, serve in some capacity, give back, whatever our lingo is, those people never seem to be empty because they're always making investment. See, the people who seem to note all the problems but never produce solutions, those people are just crabby. But the people who see a problem, but then they seek to meet the problem, those people, they're content. And so I would look at all of that and say, when Jesus says, listen, I'm going to make you the greatest, part of it is saying, I'm going to wire you in such a way that life is going to go way smoother for you because you're an investor, you're not a taker. Because you are a servant and you're not demanding to be served. And so he rewards both in this life and he rewards in the life to come. Putting others first instead of ourselves. That is the essence of service. And so I guess, kind of with all of that said, the question for today would be, well, then how can I serve as a follower in training? Right? What can I do to really engage in that? And I think this exists at two levels, right? There's the way we serve one another as we are Christians, and then there's the way we serve outside of our world, or outside of our church, or outside of our Christian community, and we serve the world around us. And so when it comes to how we serve one another, I'm going to take it back to what we see in the New Testament with something called the one another's. There's 59 occurrences of us supposedly engaging in community in such a way that we do these one another's. And the biggest one on the list is we love one another, right? It comes up repeatedly. Love one another, love one another, love one another. And that means truly doing that, right? And not just loving the people that you know, loving the people you're close with, but it also means loving the people that maybe you don't know so well. Or maybe even loving people that are really different than you. Or even maybe there's people that are fellow Christians, but they've hurt you. And you just sort of ignore them or avoid them. And he says, no, you got to love them too. Maybe that's the way you serve one another. When you read through the other one another's, it says we're to teach one another. We're to bear one another's burdens. We're to forgive one another. We're to be thankful for one another. We're to invest into one another. It says multiple times you're to encourage one another. It even says to kiss one another, which again, we want to hold off on that a little bit, but you get the essence of it. There is this sense in which it just says, I'm going to put everybody around me before myself. That's how we invest into serving one another. You can serve within the local church, you can serve within kids or any other number of capacities, but again, there's a spirit behind it that says, again, I'm holding you in higher esteem because that's service. But we also are to serve the world around us. As a church, we say our motto is for the good of the city, and so we want to always be looking and figuring out, all right, what are ways in which we can make true investment and serve people around us? Maybe it's through charity in our community. Maybe through, it's just being a listening ear or being understanding or being welcoming, opening our home to the kids in the neighborhood. That's a way that we can serve. Maybe it's just kind of taking the Boy Scout motto of saying we want to leave the world a better place than what we found. And so we make those investments. Maybe it's serving at a soup kitchen. Any number of things. It's just asking God, what do you want me to do to be a servant in the context of the world around me? Because what the world really needs to see is that we as followers of Jesus want to imitate what we see in him. When you look at the life of Jesus, he just simply served. He served the least of the least. He served the wealthy. He served the powerful as well as serving the broken. I mean, everybody, he just said, I'm just going to do this because that is what I've come to do. I didn't come to be served, but to serve. And to give my life a ransom for many. And so for us, it means we break ourselves out. We pour ourselves out for the sake of others so that others can see the Jesus that we serve. Let's go ahead and pray together. Jesus, I thank you again for your grace. I thank you for your service toward us. I thank you for the fact that you make investment in such a way that you stimulate in us this compulsion, this calling to serve. And I pray that we would do that. I pray that we wouldn't look at our world and say, again, it owes me something or unless it kind of plays to my rules that I'm going to serve. No, that we would just say, hey, I'm going to count others as more important than myself. And I do it not because I'm really trying to simply, serve them, but more importantly, I'm trying to serve you. And so help us to serve you. Help us to do it in your strength, in your grace, to display your goodwill to the world. We want to be your servants because you've served us so well in your good name. Amen.